I was called into the office on a Monday morning. No warning, no email notice, not a single clear explanation from HR, just a cold order. The CEO wants to see you now. I stood there under the harsh fluorescent lights, surrounded by the averted gazes of coworkers, already knowing exactly what was coming. What I didn't expect was to be stabbed in the back by someone I once saw as a teammate. No, by an entire system that had been waiting for the chance to kick the dropout out the door. My name is Paul Whitaker, 31 years old, a technician at Dynaforge Technologies, an industrial components manufacturer in Cleveland, Ohio. I never went to college. In fact, I dropped out of high school because my family was going through a severe financial crisis, and I had to start working immediately if we didn't want to lose our home. 12 years, that's how long I was with this company. I started from the bottom, shop assistant, then assembly technician, then production supervisor, and finally senior technical coordinator. No degree got me there, just sweat, blood, and the stubbornness of someone who had no right to fail. And this morning, the one who told me I was being fired was none other than Logan Draper, the new deputy director of our department. A highly educated guy fresh out of MIT, who had been with the company less than a year and, ironically, was also the brother-in-law of our CEO, Richard Hollings. From the moment Logan stepped into the office, he brought with him an air of arrogance, the kind of man who knew no one could touch him. Despite having zero practical experience, Logan was handed control over a team I had spent a decade building, mentoring, and working with. I never claimed to be a genius, but I knew every machine on that floor, every production process, every weak link in the system, stuff Logan hadn't even learned the names of yet. And somehow, though really it was clear, he began pushing me out of major projects, excluding me from high-level meetings, and worst of all, he handed my responsibilities to Chase Becker. Chase was a fresh graduate from the same school as Logan, MIT of course, and had only been at the company for about 8 months. He was green, polite, and, most importantly, easy to control. Logan openly favored him, putting him in direct contact with international clients, even though he hadn't mastered internal documentation yet. At first, I thought it was just a new guy trial, but then I noticed Chase receiving status emails that used to go only to me. Projects I'd led were suddenly under his name. Worse, technical errors caused by Chase were pinned on me, and no one spoke up. Everything boiled over last week when the Tundrex project worth nearly $2 million for a German client collapsed due to a misconfigured heat setting. I had warned Logan that Chase wasn't ready to oversee a complex thermal process like that. He brushed it off, calling me too old school. The result? Faulty parts shipped out, the client demanded a refund, and the entire expansion contract was canceled. And now I was being summoned to the 15th floor conference room, the one with the tinted glass and the Lake Erie view, though the sky today was gray. Logan stood beside CEO Richard, file in hand, his eyes skimming over me with a half smirk. "We're very sorry, Paul," Richard began, with the rehearsed sympathy of a CEO trying to sound empathetic. "We've reviewed the situation, given the severity of this error and the gap in performance between senior staff and the new generation. The company has decided to terminate your contract." I didn't respond immediately. I looked at Richard, then at Logan, then down at the printed error report. My name was bolded. Clean. Decisive, like this had all been scripted long ago. "I wasn't in charge of the heat treatment process," I said, slowly and clearly. "You were the final reviewer," Logan replied without hesitation. "I was excluded from the assignment meeting 3 weeks ago. Maybe you forgot to reassign your responsibilities to Chase." I wanted to laugh. Did Logan really think I'd argue just to cling to this chair? I stood up, quietly, politely, but as I turned to leave, I looked directly at Logan and said, "I know what you're doing, and I hope, when you sit in the seat I held for 5 years, you're ready for the consequences too." Chase stood in the hallway, avoiding my eyes. I didn't blame him. I used to be him, a new guy, naive, thinking success came from following the right people. The problem is, he picked the wrong one to follow. I left the building at 9:12 in the morning. The sun had just started to break through the gray clouds, and under that light, I didn't feel defeated. I felt free. I walked out of Dynaforge with soaked shoes and a cluttered mind, but strangely, the first thing I thought about Wasn't the job. Not Logan, not the cold termination notice in my bag. It was Elliot, my younger brother. I hadn't seen him in almost 10 years. I used to think that losing something big, like a job or my dignity, would leave me feeling hollow. But no. What choked me up right now was the emptiness from childhood, when I stood in the hallway of a family court, watching Elliot being pulled from my mother's arms like an item in a ruthless auction. I was 11 when our parents divorced. Back then, Elliot and I were inseparable. He was 3 years younger than me, always clinging to me whenever Dad yelled or when Mom cried in the kitchen in the middle of the night. We shared a bond, something invisible but vital, the only thing that made the air in that cramped three-bedroom house in suburban Columbus, Ohio, bearable. Our mom, Diane, had been a skilled accountant, but quit after having Elliot to stay home. Our dad, George Whitaker, was a manager at a medical equipment company. On paper, he looked like a decent father, but behind closed doors, George was cold, controlling, and treated Mom like an obstacle to his career. When things fell apart, Mom wanted to keep both of us. George refused. If you try to keep both kids, I won't pay a single cent of child support. I still remember Mom's face, hurt and helpless, like the life was being drained out of her, but she had to stay standing. Then came the cruel bargain. One child each, like we were items to split. George picked Elliot, not because he loved him more, but because he's younger and easier to mold, his exact words. I'll never forget Elliot screaming in the car when they took him away. He shouted my name until his voice broke. Mom held me by the window, tears falling uncontrollably. I wanted to run out, pound on the glass, grab my brother back. But Mom held me, her hands trembling like they were holding on to the last bit of strength she had left. "I can't lose both of you," she whispered, maybe to herself more than to me. The separation happened fast. In less than 2 weeks, George moved into a new house with Elliot and a new woman named Pamela. Yes, just 2 weeks. That meant George had been seeing Pamela before the divorce. She was an employee under him, known for saying, "I don't get along with kids, but I know how to manage everything." I hated Pamela from the moment I heard her name. She didn't like children, that much was obvious, but George handed Elliot over to her like raising an 8-year-old was just another task on her planner. Mom tried to stay in touch. She called, wrote letters, sent birthday gifts to Elliot every year, but the responses grew fewer, then stopped completely. George claimed Elliot was too busy with school or summer camp or, "He doesn't want to talk to you." Once, I skipped school and followed Mom to George's house, just to catch a glimpse of Elliot. The iron gate didn't open, but I saw him standing still at a second-floor window, his eyes blank, unfamiliar, like a soul swallowed whole. And I called his name. No response. A moment later, Pamela pulled the curtain shut and everything vanished, as if it had never existed. After that day, I never mentioned Elliot again. Neither did my mother. Some things hurt so deeply that even saying them out loud once can make old scars start bleeding. Now here I am, 19 years later, unemployed and suddenly replaying everything like a film in reverse. I have no idea where Elliot is now. Maybe he's living somewhere, working, in love. Or maybe he's sitting beside Logan on the 15th floor, judging me with the same eyes our father had. A strong gust of wind swept across Lake Erie, making me shiver. But I didn't look back. I kept walking, as if stopping would cause me to collapse. Because it wasn't the unemployment that hurt most, but the feeling that I let Elliot slip away from me, like water through my fingers, like a childhood that would never return. I had lost him, and I was beginning to understand that today's firing was just the opening act. The truth behind all of it might be far crueler. I used to think nothing could be worse than being separated from Elliot, but I was wrong. Because when I was 16, life landed another punch without warning. It was a freezing winter morning. The snow was so thick that I had to walk nearly 40 minutes to school because the bus was stuck on the freeway. By the time I got home, fingers numb, shirt still damp, I found my mother lying motionless on the kitchen floor next to the sink, a teaspoon still in her hand. I screamed until my voice gave out. The paramedics rushed her to Southside Memorial Hospital. The diagnosis? An ischemic stroke. Part of her face was paralyzed, and her left hand had almost no reflexes. The doctor told me to prepare for her not being able to work for at least 8 to 10 months. I sat in the hallway outside the ICU, heart pounding like a war drum. I had never seen my mother so weak. The woman who had worked every job imaginable to raise me now lay still like a shadow, tangled in IV lines. I didn't cry. I just went numb. After 2 days hovering around the hospital, I called George, my father. I hadn't called him in 7 years, but that day I had no other choice. My hands trembled as I dialed, hoping he would remember that I was his son. Hello, it's me, Paul. Yeah, what's going on? Mom's in the hospital, stroke. The doctor says she needs time to recover, and I can't cover all the expenses alone. Could you? We already agreed on no support, didn't we? His voice was as stiff as an old fax transmission. But I'm busy, figure it out. He hung up. I don't remember how long I held the phone after the line went dead. I only remember my hands shaking so hard I nearly dropped it onto the cold tile floor. Inside me, something broke. 3 days later, I picked up a second job at a local grocery store, evening shifts, from 4 to 10. The owner, Mr. Carroll, was an older Irishman who gave me light work since I was still in school, stocking shelves, helping tidy up, and mopping floors at the end of the night. The work wasn't hard, but the pay was low, just enough to buy medicine, pay rent for our rundown apartment, and occasionally get fruit for Mom outside of her hospital meal plan. That's when I started to spiral. School by day, work by evening, home care at night. I stopped having time to study. I didn't sleep enough. I quit sports, my grades dropped fast. My homeroom teacher called me in 3 times in just 1 month. Worse, I started avoiding my girlfriend at the time, Rachel, the sweet girl from my advanced English class. She texted me every night, asking if I was okay, why I wasn't answering. But I couldn't bring myself to say I was exhausted, physically and emotionally. I didn't want her pity. Then one Saturday night, I got home just before midnight, drained, and found a note taped to the door. Paul, I can't keep doing this. I feel like I'm in love with someone who doesn't exist. I hope you find your way back to yourself. I stood there, fingertips on Rachel's familiar rounded handwriting, not sure whether to feel sad about being dumped or laugh because, once again, I had lost something else. I pulled out my phone, opened my semester grade report, and like a final stamp of failure, the screen glowed red. I had failed 3 classes, second academic warning. That night, I sat beside Mom's bed. She was still weak but could speak more clearly. How are you holding up, Paul? I looked at her, forcing a smile. I'm okay, I've got it covered. But my hand clutched the blanket so tightly my knuckles turned white. I thought about dropping out. I thought about going full-time, switching to overnight shifts. I even thought about selling my bike, the one I had saved for 2 years to buy. Each thought, one by one, burned through what was left of 16-year-old me. A week later, I submitted my withdrawal form, but deep down I knew it wasn't temporary. It was the end. I was no longer a student. I became a full-time grocery store worker, and from there stepped into the never-ending spiral of adult survival. And I swore, if one day I managed to lift my head out of the mud, I would make every person who turned their back on me look at me again. And this time, I wouldn't look down. I lived like a shadow through that winter. By day, I stocked shelves, ran the register, received deliveries. By night, I made soup, gave medicine, did laundry for Mom. Sometimes I fell asleep in the old leather chair by her bed, the one she used to sit in to read books to me when I was in first grade. Life back then was a blur of repetitive, numb days. I barely felt anything toward the world around me, except for one constant feeling: I was sinking deeper every day. Until one Thursday afternoon. I was behind the counter, eyes focused on the barcode scanner, when I heard a familiar voice across the register. Paul, is that you? I looked up. Standing before me were Mr. and Mrs. McCarthy, the couple who owned the diner that had given me my first job when I was 14. They had a little boy with them, probably their grandson. Mrs. McCarthy still wore that hand-knitted sweater with a pine cone pattern, and Mr. McCarthy had on the old fedora we used to joke looked like a detective's hat. I couldn't help but laugh for the first time in months. "My goodness, you've changed so much," she said, gently touching my arm, concern in her voice. "You've gotten so thin, your cheekbones are sticking out." I nodded awkwardly. Didn't know what to say, didn't want to explain, but Mr. McCarthy wasn't one to ignore the change. "Are you working here now? Not going to school anymore?" I bit my lip. Then, like someone had pulled the release valve on a pressure tank, it all came out. My mother's stroke, my father refusing to help, my girlfriend breaking up with me, the failed grades, dropping out. Everything burst forth like floodwaters breaching a dam. They didn't say anything, just listened quietly. After a while, Mr. McCarthy placed a hand on my shoulder. "You can't live like this forever, Paul. Working night shifts at a convenience store isn't a future." I lowered my head and sighed. "I don't really have any other option." Mrs. McCarthy looked at her husband, then turned to me. "Here's the thing. Our son, Rick, just took over a metalworking business from his uncle. He's looking for an apprentice. If you want, we can introduce you." I looked up, not quite believing what I'd just heard. "But I don't know anything about metalwork." "You know how to learn. You used to help out at our diner, remember?" Mr. McCarthy gave a soft chuckle. "You're hardworking, you listen, and you're not afraid of tough jobs. Those are things no school teaches." Didn't answer right away, but for the first time in months, I felt something stir in my chest. Something alive. 3 days later, I showed up at McAllister Precision, a modest machine shop on the outskirts of Cleveland. The place was under 7,000 square feet, but inside was a whole different world. Metal grinders screeching, the smell of oil and hot steel, and dozens of hands operating CNC machines, grinders, lathes, all with sharp focus and practice speed. Rick, Mr. and Mrs. McCarthy's son, stepped out of the supervisor's office. He looked to be in his mid-40s, solid build, short-cropped hair, safety goggles perched on his forehead. His expression was serious but not harsh. "You're Paul, right? My parents told me a lot about you. Come with me." I followed him past the rows of machines. Rick pointed out each section, the person in charge, and every step of the process. Everything he said was short, clear, legal. He wasn't one for small talk. After the tour, we stopped in the back where an old but functional lathe stood. "You'll start here, clean up, get familiar with the tools, learn the process. 3-month trial. If you do well, I keep you. If not, I'll tell you straight." "Got it?" I nodded. Rick looked at me for a moment, then asked, "You planning to go back to school?" I stayed quiet. "That's okay, not everyone needs a degree to succeed, but here, you've got to keep learning. Think of this place as your second school." That day, I left the shop wearing a navy blue uniform with McAllister Precision printed across the back. Sweat ran down my spine, but I felt lighter than I had in a long time. In the first week, I learned to identify different grades of steel, various cutting heads, and machine settings. My hands blistered. My wrists ached from the unfamiliar motions, but I didn't complain, because for the first time in a long time, I was doing something meaningful. Rick didn't give praise or criticism. He just left red ink notes in my notebook, and I treated every one like a lifeline. Every morning before I left for work, I greeted my mom, though she hadn't fully recovered. I left a note on her nightstand, heading to work. "I'll be okay. You've got to be okay too." And every night when I got home, she left me a scrawled reply. "My son is a fighter." Maybe my life didn't start at some fancy university. I had no framed degree, no prestigious scholarship. But that day, amidst the grinding machines and sweat-drenched workers, I found something no classroom could teach me. Self-respect, and a tiny but very real flicker of hope that I could rebuild my life from scratch. Life at McAllister Precision pulled me into a new rhythm, a demanding one, but it sparked something I'd never felt before in my youth. The joy of learning, of being seen. I worked from 6 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon, grabbed a quick dry sandwich for lunch, then rushed home to change my mom's bandages. She hadn't fully recovered, but she was learning to walk again with crutches, slow and shaky. Every time I walked through the door, she'd look up and smile, saying just one thing. "So what did you learn today?" That question alone kept me going. One day in mid-July, I was scrubbing down the lathe when I heard someone call my name from behind. "Paul Whitaker?" I turned around and nearly dropped the oil can. Standing there was Alex Turner, my best friend from junior high, the only one who ever had the guts to punch a bully for calling me the kid with no dad and a sick mom. I stared at Alex, stunned. He looked totally different. Slightly longer hair, dark sunglasses, a gray hoodie with a Cincinnati Technical School logo. "How on earth did you find me?" I asked. Alex grinned, voice still raspy like it used to be. "Pure luck. My grandma gets her car serviced here. Heard Rick mention some kid named Paul, my age, doing a great job. I got curious. Asked a few more questions. Figured it had to be you." After that day, Alex started coming to the shop regularly, not to hang out, but to learn. He was a senior in mechatronics at Cincinnati State, working on his final project. At first, I just helped him with a few simple mechanical drafts, gave feedback on cut angles, shaft diameters, and welding joints. But the more we collaborated, the more we realized something. We were a perfect team. I had the hands-on experience, Alex had the theory and the latest tech. And then, that crazy idea hit. One late August night, after finishing 2 cups of ramen noodles on my porch, Alex looked at me, eyes glowing under the streetlight. "Paul, what if we do something big? I mean, really big. Not just a graduation project, something that could change how industry works." I burst out laughing. "I'm just a dropout, you're about to get your engineering degree, you can do this. All I've got are wrenches and grease. And I don't know how to torque a bolt properly. You have what I'm missing. If we team up, we might actually pull this off." From that day on, after every shift, Alex and I buried ourselves in drawings. On weekends, we borrowed Rick's workshop, of course, after asking permission and promising not to destroy his lathe, to test our ideas. By the 3rd month, we built our first prototype, a fuel-efficient torque converter for small hydraulic presses. No one expected that rough-looking chunk of metal would later become our first patented invention. Alex filed the paperwork and submitted it to the Federal Patent Office. I didn't expect much. I didn't even dare dream beyond keeping my job at Rick's shop. But one January morning, just as I was oiling a machine spindle, Alex burst into the shop, face pale with excitement. "They approved it, Paul. We've got the registration number. The patent office gave us a number. We officially have our first patent." I stood frozen for a few seconds. Then I screamed like a madman. 3 months later, Alex founded Axis Dynamics, LLC, focused on developing, manufacturing, and licensing mechanical technology. I still worked at Rick's shop, but I officially became technical advisor and co-owner of the company. We spent the entire next year refining the product, sending prototypes to small manufacturing firms across the Midwest, and some of them signed technology licensing deals at prices we never imagined. Over $400,000 in the first year. We went on to invent 2 more devices, a vibrating filter for conveyor systems and a smart modular heat sensor for automated welders. All 3 were patented. All 3 were ordered. I couldn't believe what was happening. From a dropout who once fell asleep beside his sick mother's bed, I was now sitting in tech strategy meetings with a subsidiary office in Michigan. The same hands once covered in machine grease now held pens, signing deals with international partners. But I never forgot where I came from. And I definitely didn't forget who turned their backs on me. "Paul, are you really going to license the patent that cheap?" Alex asked when I proposed letting an old company in Cleveland use our first device at an unusually low fee. I stayed silent for a moment, then said, "Their chairman was the only one who ever gave someone like me a shot. I don't repay kindness with money, but I also don't punish people with power." Alex nodded. No further questions. We understood each other without needing to say much. What I didn't expect was that my old company was about to crush that kindness in a way I never imagined. I never thought I'd see Michael again, at least not in a meeting room on the 14th floor of the building where I was once fired. But that day, I was in a strategic meeting for Axis Dynamics when my phone kept buzzing. At first, I ignored it, but then I saw the name Michael Whitaker flash across the screen, and I froze. I hadn't saved his number, but the tone of the message was unmistakable. "Please, bro, call me. Something serious happened." I didn't reply. I didn't call back. 10 years of silence. 10 years he left me drowning in shredded memories, in lonely nights that ate at me. 10 years he lived with our father, pampered, introduced as the only son, given a full education while I scraped for rent money. And now he calls me bro? How ironic. Less than an hour later, I got another call, this time from David Briggs. I nearly threw my phone at the wall. "Paul, I want to revisit the licensing terms. Dynaforge is having major issues with the compression system you developed. I demand—" "You have no right to demand anything, David." I cut him off, voice cold and flat. "Listen, you still owe this company. If we hadn't trained you, you wouldn't have any patents at all. I was pushed out of there, remember?" I hung up. But the storm didn't stop. 3 days later, I received an official notice from the old company's legal team. They wanted to renegotiate licensing rights for the ADLux 1.3 pressure regulator used in their new hydraulic press after discovering a critical flaw that had stalled their entire production line. The problem? I hadn't been involved in that project since I left the company, and worse, the person who took over the assignment was none other than Michael. I frowned and opened an old internal email thread Sarah, a former colleague, had kept me in the loop on, and what I saw left me stunned. System error report. Responsibility, Paul Whitaker. I felt a surge of heat rush straight to my temples. Michael had blamed me, even though I had been gone for almost 14 months. That afternoon, I received a video call from Sarah Bennett, the only person at Dynaforge I still trusted. "Paul, this is spiraling out of control." I figured. "Michael?" Sarah nodded. Then she showed me a clip from the meeting room camera. Michael stood there, expression blank, speaking clearly to the executive board. "The error originated when my brother was still in charge of the system. It seems like he didn't finalize the handover documentation, or deliberately left technical gaps." My brother? I nearly threw up during dinner. I clenched my jaw. Sarah was silent for a moment, then said, "David is using this opportunity to demand the cancellation of the licensing deal with Axis Dynamics. He says that if we don't continue the license at the old rate, he'll sue for financial damages." I let out a dry laugh. He doesn't even understand what intellectual property means, and he's already talking about suing. Sarah looked at me, her eyes calm. "They don't care about what's right or wrong anymore. They're panicking, and Michael is clearly taking advantage of it." That night, I sat with Alex in our small office in Columbus. "What are you going to do?" Alex asked, eyes locked onto mine. I stayed quiet. Then I pulled the licensing agreement for ADLux 1.3 with Dynaforge out of my bag. I placed it on the table, tapped on the line that read, "Royalty fee. Special rate, designated by Paul Whitaker." I've already been more than generous. Alex nodded. "We're not extending the license." I nodded back. "And this time, we're doing it by the book. Take them to court if we have to." The next day, I sent the official notice of termination. Effective immediately. David called me, snarling like a cornered animal. "You really going to destroy this company?" "No," I replied calmly. "I just want people who blame others for their own incompetence to finally take responsibility." "You're ungrateful, Paul." "I once begged my father for help when my mom was in the ICU, he told me. Figure it out yourself. Now, it's your turn. Figure it out." I hung up. It didn't feel triumphant. It felt peaceful. But I knew Michael wouldn't stop there. He was my brother, but also the one building a fortress out of lies, with secret handshakes and backroom deals with David. And for the first time in my life, I knew I wouldn't forgive him. Because I had forgiven too many times, and each time I got stabbed in the back. That night, Alex and I sat across from each other in the small office at Axis Dynamics, saying nothing. On the table was a folder stamped in red ink. Notice of termination of technology license, ADLux 1.3. No drama, just a signature, a confirmation line, and a nod from Alex. But I knew the moment my pen touched that paper, it would mark the end of an old empire, a system I once belonged to, sacrificed my youth for, and now I was the one burning it down. 4 days later, Dynaforge Technologies issued an emergency report. Several production lines were suspended indefinitely due to unresolved system failures. Stock dropped 8% within the first 2 hours of trading. European clients pulled nearly $2.7 million in pending orders. David Briggs was immediately summoned to the executive board. According to the internal update Sarah sent me, the meeting lasted nearly 5 hours and ended with one sentence. "I warned you, and now we can't cover for you anymore." David was fired the same day. His access card deactivated, his company accounts locked. The man who once climbed on my back to climb the ranks was now kicked out of the chair he thought he'd keep forever. I thought I'd feel victorious, but no. I just felt like justice had finally been served. Michael was a different story. He wasn't fired right away, but pressure from internal communications, from the technical team, and from former co-workers who had seen him pin his failures on me, left him with nowhere to hide. 3 weeks later, he resigned. 3 days after that, his girlfriend dumped him and his friends cut him off. And then I got a message at midnight. I know I was wrong, I just wanted to be acknowledged, but now everyone's turned their back on me. I read it, then turned off the screen. I had nothing left to say to someone who had torn blood ties apart with lies. The worst news was for George Whitaker, my father. He was the first person I called all those years ago when my mom had a stroke, and also the first to hang up coldly, leaving me to struggle alone. Now he no longer held any position at the medical equipment distribution company where he had once been a sales director. The reason? Axis Dynamics, the company I co-founded, officially did not renew the license for the ADF Flex system, a sensor software developed by Alex and me. His company had been using it in nearly 60% of its temperature management systems. Without a timely replacement, their entire supply contract with a major hospital chain in Illinois was canceled. When he realized I was behind it, he went to Alex's office. I wasn't there that day, but Alex told me, still visibly annoyed. Shouted in the middle of the company lobby, claiming we were using personal grudges to destroy his career. And what did you say? I said, if a man once turned his back on his own child when that child begged for help, then no one can stop karma from coming. The next news spread like wildfire. My father's new wife, Pamela, filed for divorce. I heard it from an old acquaintance who works at a law office. She said Pamela blamed George for bringing Michael into the house and ruining everything. Michael was the once pampered son, was now a burden. Unemployed, disgraced, and homeless. The house that was once the new family's home was seized and rushed into foreclosure. The pictures on the walls were taken down. Everything fell to dust. I looked at the photo Sarah sent. Michael curled up outside a grocery store next to a bag of canned food, and I couldn't recognize the little brother I once held when he was 3. I thought it would all end there. But then Mr. Miller, the current chairman of Dynaforge, unexpectedly called me. I wasn't planning to answer, but then I thought, I wanted to see if they still had any shame. Paul, I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. I'm here to make an offer. Make it quick. We're willing to renew the license at the new rate, whatever you and Alex set. I paused for a few seconds, then replied, I don't make that decision alone, but if Alex agrees, I'll let you speak with our attorney. You don't want to come back? I laughed. I came back once. That time you kicked me out with a single order. Now I have no reason to walk through that door again. The new contract was signed 2 weeks later. The royalty fee was 3 times higher than the previous one. Alex included a clause, if the licensee violates any condition, the contract will be terminated immediately with no right to appeal. Mr. Miller signed it. He had no other choice. An entire system that once looked down on me now had to survive on technology created by me and Alex. It wasn't revenge. It was putting everyone back in their rightful place. One autumn morning, as I stood on the 3rd-floor balcony of Axis Dynamics' office, sipping a bitter cup of coffee and watching the rush of people below, I realized I no longer flinched at the sound of my phone ringing. No more legal threats, no more calls begging for a cheap patent renewal, and no more fake apologies from relatives who had abandoned me when I needed them most. I had survived it all. And more than that, I had won. My mom, Diane Whitaker, fully recovered after more than 2 years of battling partial paralysis, physical therapy, and silent depression. She didn't return to accounting. Instead, she founded a small business called Rise and Restore, specializing in home care and cleaning services for single mothers. I still remember the day she named the company. I asked her, "Doesn't that name sound a bit like a rehab center?" She laughed, her eyes as resolute as ever. "I used to be down, now I stand up, and I want to help other women do the same." Not long after, Rise and Restore was honored by a local newspaper as the Outstanding Social Enterprise of the Year. They wrote about my mother, calling her the quiet woman behind hundreds of stable households. I keep that newspaper tucked in a drawer, just beneath the first contract I ever signed with Axis Dynamics. Not to brag, but to remind myself kindness can become power if you protect it to the very end. As for Alex, after our company passed $5 million in annual revenue, he did something that left me speechless for a moment. "I want to buy back my grandparents' old house. The one you lived in during high school?" Alex nodded, then spoke, barely holding back emotion. "They were the only people who never gave up on me. I want them to live out their final years in peace, not in a house with rotting doors, a leaking roof, and a fireplace that sometimes cuts off at midnight." I went with Alex the day he signed the purchase papers. He renovated the whole place, kept the red brick fireplace where his grandpa used to tell stories, but added radiant floor heating, replaced all the plumbing, and built a small flower garden in the back so his grandma could grow lavender. I don't need them to thank me. I just need them to know I never forgot, Alex said as he looked at the old house glowing warmly that first winter night. Meanwhile, on the other side of the story, the ones who manipulated, exploited, and belittled others were slowly crumbling. David Briggs, the man who tossed me out like trash, is now applying for jobs at smaller firms with lower positions. Word is, he's getting divorced because his wife couldn't stand relying on a man who once held his head high, but now grovels for every opportunity. Michael, my brother, is drifting somewhere around the outskirts of Detroit, doing odd jobs from car washes to deliveries to installing security cameras. I didn't hear that from following him. A former coworker of mine spotted him handing out flyers at a bus stop. I didn't laugh. I didn't pity him. I just repeated what Alex once said on a rainy night while we sat in a warehouse. Sometimes justice doesn't come from the courts. It comes from each person having to live with what they've done. He called it poetic justice. And now, I believe in it. My mom finally won the lawsuit against George, my father. The court ruled that he had to pay emotional damages for intentionally concealing infidelity during the marriage and for refusing to help his children during a crisis. I went with her to court that day. She wore a white blouse, her hair tied neatly back, her face not angry or sad, but clear like someone who had finally cut the rope that bound her for 20 years. George hung his head. He looked much older, hair fully gray, shoulders slumped. I no longer recognized the man who once stood before my 16-year-old self and said, "Figure it out yourself." Now it was his turn to figure it out. That evening, I returned to my old apartment, stood by the window, and looked out at the city lights. Thinking back on every step of the journey, every wound, every betrayal, every fall, I pulled out an old envelope from the drawer. Inside was a crumpled piece of paper my mom had written in the hospital. "Never think of yourself as a burden. You're the reason I survived." I folded it and placed it in my wallet. Not as a keepsake, but as a reminder how far I've come and that there's no turning back. My story didn't begin with luck, nor did it end in revenge. It was a journey from being cast aside and underestimated to rising and creating value with my own hands. I lost my family, lost trust, but I never lost myself. My mom rose after illness, Alex remained fiercely loyal, and I found freedom in justice and real human connection. No one is born to stay down forever. What matters is how you rise and why. What do you think about Paul's journey and the way he faced those who turned their backs on him? Has justice been truly served? Share your thoughts below. And don't forget to follow the channel so you won't miss the next powerful family story.